Hello there, sword friends. Today I have a Type 18C sword made by Lukas Mastle-Goer. I believe I am saying the gentleman's name right-ish, but, well, I'll call him Lukas from now on. Anyway, forgive the massacring of the name. The Scabbard is also made by Adam Dörflinger. I'm probably, again, massacring a name here, and I'll talk about the Scabbard when I get to it, but know they're made by two separate craftsmen. Also know that this sword, special thanks to sword friend Corey, who sent this to me after having it custom made. He didn't even get a chance to hold it yet, and I'm able to share it with you by his good graces for sending this to me for the purposes of this rambly review right here. Now, also, before I get into the nitty-gritty of the review, things you should know, as I often kind of get the caveats out of the way. I am not an expert in this stuff. I don't study historic European martial arts, so just take what I say with a grain of salt. Also, as I've noted, this is not my property, so I'm not going to break it or destroy it. Sword friend Corey actually does want it back. He has a hefty sum invested into it and would like to at least hold it before it degrades in its condition. So my testing will be pretty limited in terms of what I'm going to do, but I do get to cut with it. I do get to move it around, and I'll show and talk about that stuff. But again, no, this is just from the perspective of a novice, and I am being somewhat gentle with it because it's not mine, and I want to preserve it. It's a very expensive sword, and we would like it to remain that way. Let's talk about what the sword is supposed to be. Now, it was custom ordered from sword friend Corey, and basically he had this hilt construction designed intentionally. It's got a similar crossguard to what you would find on the Alexandria Armory pieces, but a different waisted grip and a fishtail type pommel, and those are intentional. That's what he ordered, so it's obviously not a historic replica. The blade doesn't have on the kind of base above the crossguard any Arabic writing or inscriptions or anything like that, but it does have a lot of similarity in the blade profile and shape, and the crossguard to the piece found in the Alexandria Armory or the Harriet Dean sword, but the rest of it's a little bit different. I don't know if it's necessarily period correct or not. I'm tits on a board useless when it comes to historical accuracy and whatnot, but I can say that this is what sword friend Corey ordered. He liked the waisted grip look that Lukas was able to achieve, and this was similar supposedly to a blade that he had made in the past, and this kind of fishtail pommel had enough zazz that sword friend Corey requested that it be on this sword that he custom ordered. The sword was a little over 3,000 euros and new just for the blade, and then the Scabbard, I believe, was 400 something euros. I'll get exact figures and put them in the description down below, and I suppose we'll evaluate if this sword is worth it or not in comparison to other things. It's a big hefty sword with a big hefty price tag, so I suppose now I will get into the actual nitty-gritty of what I'm seeing here, and hopefully you will benefit from that. I don't know if you'll benefit from it, but you might know if ordering a sword from Lukas is worth your hard-earned money or not. So what does a sword like this do? Honestly, from a historical context, I don't really know. I do know that this typology of sword is kind of seen as a bit of a cheat code when it comes to cutting in modern competitive tatami mat style cutting events. The blade is relatively pronounced, it's wide and somewhat thin. Despite its thin blade, it's actually pretty rigid, and it's very easy to cut things with a blade of this profile if it has an edge and is made well. So this one happens to be made well, but I would say from a historical context, I don't really know how these would be used. I've heard sources say that these, or rather some of the photos on some of the websites I've seen, show that a sword like this might be used in war against armored opponents, be it in plate or mail. The tip doesn't seem terribly conducive to moving through or spreading apart mail rings, at least not in being terribly effective. It might catch on them, and it's rigid enough to maybe push your opponent around. Also, the blade seems so wide that I don't know how conducive it would be to spreading apart the gaps in plate and finding your opponent's weaknesses there. It is obviously a very pronounced chopping blade. It's great in the cut, but I don't know what sword isn't better at cutting just an unarmored opponent. So this would probably move through clothing and the like better. And I've also heard that these were used more successfully in warmer climates to do just that against opponents that might not have been wearing plate or mail armor. The point is, though, I don't really know how these swords were used. From a modern context, as I noted, they tend to get used really successfully in cutting competitions. They move through tatami mats really well because of their very, very wide stance and somewhat thin profile. Also, there's not a lot of additional ledges. It's made to kind of sail through something if your edge alignment is good, and that's how I think they're used today. Anyway, if you have more information about the history of these types of things, throw it in the commentary down below. If you're at my channel, it's not because you appreciate my understanding of history. I have little knowledge when it comes to that. But how historic this is, hopefully the dynamics and the rest of this video will help you make a determination about that if you happen to know more on the subject. The pommel, you don't really have to look very hard to see that it's not perfectly symmetrical. It's really quite good, but it's not perfect. There are chamfered edges, and it's a sign of handmadeness, if you will, but obviously a lot of attention to detail. You do have to look to see some of the unevenness, but it's pretty hard to see. Anyway, it has a lot of dimension to it. It swells in one way. There's chamfered edges. It's really a well executed, fun pommel. I like this shape more than I anticipated. It is pretty well done in just about every aspect. You can see the peen over here and just how clean and even and nice it is. There's no misplaced hammer marks, and again from this side you can kind of make out some of the dimension here. Seems like every time I look at the pommel in detail, I get a vision of the rest of the sword and its attention to detail. So this pommel has dimension and attention to detail. It's handmade and imperfect, but shows a lot of effort to make it as perfect as possible. There's not a lot of effort done in making it a mirror polish or embellishing it with lots of engraving or anything like that, yet in the subtle details they're all well done. The lines are straight and clean, and there's some efforts to just make this as well made and practical as it can be. And the rest of the sword is going to be a little bit like that. Now the polish, you can see it's kind of a satin polish, and the rest of the sword again follows that same trend. Anyway, overall it's really well done. It's also a very comfortable thing. Forgive the extra leather sounds here, but it's a very comfortable thing to grip with bare hands or in a glove. It gives you just a little bit of extra purchase, and I find that my fingers kind of rest in these swells. It's just the dimension of this sword pommel is very comfortable. I can grip it like yay, or as I mentioned, my fingers will fall into these swells, and overall it's a really interesting and well done pommel. I like it a lot. I want one. Now we will talk about the grip, and basically the lines on here are even, nice, well done. There's not a lot of imperfections. This would be about the only thing I could really draw your attention to, is this little divot right here, which is relatively minor. You can make out that the line, the seam, kind of wavers around, but I didn't find any spot where it kind of ticks up or is irritable, or that I even really feel it in my hands. The overall shape of the hilt is really quite good as well. You can see it has kind of an octagonal or hexagonal shape here. It's easy to index and identify where the edge is. As we go down towards the pommel here, it becomes more cylindrical, though there's still ledges that let you know where the edge is, but it rotates quite a bit easier in your hand here. The risers on the sword are also pretty well done and even. I like that the color isn't terribly even. There's kind of blotches and imperfections, but it adds to the character. It looks clean and new, but at the same time there's enough variation in the color that it meshes well. The same thing happens on the scabbard here, and just how well they kind of go together. These were made by two different people. I don't know if there was some effort made to use the same dye, or if they sourced it from the same location, but the imperfections in the coloration on the grip blend right in with the kind of discolorations on the scabbard as well, and give it a more rustic, charactered look. Anyway, this little divot right here again would be the only thing, which you really have to move it around in the light to even see. I don't know if the core of this is made, well, I don't know what wood the core is made from, but I do know it's held up and been solid for what little use I've had from it. I also don't know if this was bound in some sort of cord and then wrapped in leather, or if it's just the artifact of the cord, though Lukas provided some pictures and I suppose I could look at them to figure it out. I just haven't done that before I started rambling in this review. The other thing worthy of attention is noting just how these transitions work here. There's no sharp ledges or uncomfortable bits that my fingers catch on. It's really well done how this transition to a more complex shape fits in. I'm really quite happy with it. If you turn it around and get it at this angle, it almost looks like there is some slight ledge there, if my camera will participate in focus, but none of this really catches on my fingers. They all slide quite easily. The same transition happens at the crossguard area. You can see just how well shaped this is. I happen to like the transition here. There's no overlap in any kind of significant way. All of this looks intentional, and the edges here are chamfered in such a way that it doesn't bite into my fingers. Now, I don't know exactly how you might bind or hold the sword when you're moving this around. It's a big sword with a lot of mass, but these never really bit into my fingers. There's no uncomfortable spot on this crossguard for me. I suppose we can just talk about the crossguard. It's obviously modeled after the Harriet Dean type Alexandria sword, and I don't know, it pays homage to what that crossguard is, but it's also much more accurate, much more even. You can make out in the historical photos there's a lot of asymmetry, and this one is much closer to, I think, what that sword is trying to be. There's just a lot of attention to detail, and one thing that I like a lot is this space in the crossguard area here is super tight. Lukas did this amazingly well. Now, this is one of the tightest little areas that I've seen. It's a point of contention for some people. They look at this area in the crossguard, how this meets up as a sign of quality, whether or not it was period or how historically relevant it is or how it affects performance is really not the point. It's kind of it's a real pain in the ass thing to do. It takes time and skill to get it as tight as this, and it's just really well done. So tip of my hat to Lukas here. In terms of custom swords, this is the closest I've ever seen somebody really get. Albion is about the only one that has these types of tolerances, so it's nice to see somebody take the time to do that. Well done. So in terms of the crossguard overall, it's nice. I don't know how much bigger or smaller it is. It looks like the quillions kind of taper off, but not as significantly as some other examples that I've seen. Some of the examples out there have very small little tips on the quillions, but overall it's very comfortable and nice. And I suppose that brings us to it's a scabbard. So again, this scabbard is made by Adam Dörflinger, if I'm saying the name right. Here is his card. If you are interested, you can give him a jingle. A couple things to note. Really, aesthetically, it's very pretty. I like how the blade transitions, though there is just the most minor of gaps on one side and not the other. If you see here, it's just not entirely, it doesn't sit just perfectly. Beyond that, though, at the moment, it's holding in the scabbard, though in the summer, I want to say that it fell out. I really have to shake it hard to get it to fall out as it is right now with the temperature. It has these nice risers in it. I like how even it is. One interesting note as well is that when I got this, I believe the blade was shipped to me from England. The tip had poked out of the container about yay far in the scabbard, and it's still pretty and unscathed, and I don't know how long it was like that, but it jutted itself out of the package that it was in, and is still in one piece, is still in good shape overall. So I suppose that's the mark of a well-made scabbard. I don't see any bubbles or anything like that. The kind of texture of the leather seems very nice, and it has subtle details like along the edge here. There's a little crease, the slight risers. These move around a little bit, and I don't know what to make of them. I'm not a huge fan of this harness system, but then again, I'm not that smart and couldn't figure out how to put the belt on and tie it, other than, well, I can hardly tie my shoes correctly. Anyway, aside from my stupidity, the seam here and the stitching is pretty well done, and overall I like it. One additional detail that I happen to like about this is the attention to detail around the mouth of the scabbard here. There's a little bit of leather covering, and there's some felt from what I can tell, lining, or at least around the mouth area of the scabbard. As nice as that is, it kind of gives it this, I don't think, if I hear it rattle in there, I think it must just be around the mouth area. It provides a little bit of resistance, not a lot, but it at least lets the sword kind of gently slide in terms of drawing it quickly. I can still pull it. It doesn't offer a lot of resistance, but it's nice. My concern would be that if it were sheathed wet along the felt, or this little cloth pad on the inside would hold oil or something that you don't want in there, it might be hard to clean. But aesthetically, it looks very nice, and it has an execution on here that's pretty well done. Putting felt and other stuff in there sometimes can bind too much, or not enough, and in any case, it seems to fit just about right. Now we are going to talk about the blade, and the first thing I'm going to start out with are the things that I don't like, because there's not that many of them. But right here you can probably see there's this mild halo around Lukas's signature, and it's like a coffee stain on the signature of an important document. I like his signature, I like the emblem, I think it's cool, I think the reason behind it is cool given his history of medicine and also sword making. It's bamf. But there's a little shadow or halo or I don't know, some stain around it, which I find unbecoming. The other bit you can notice in here is that there's a secondary bevel. I suppose the antiques very often have secondary bevels. This one is more pronounced in some areas than other. There is a secondary bevel. It's still very sharp, but I don't know, it'd be nice if it kind of tapered right down without having this secondary bevel area on it. Anyway, those are about the only things I don't like about the blade. Other than that, it is an excellent sword. Please allow me to share the reasons with you. So one, the surfaces of this blade are really flat, but what you might be able to see here is that the central ridge doesn't waver or wander around. It's very crisp, very clean, and also, my beard. Also, the slants of this blade are excellently done. There's very little surface ripple. It's tough for me to point to any spot where it's any. I have to be very careful with this sword because it's really quite sharp, but it's just excellently done. It's so flat and clean and nice and smooth. That's a point that I usually harp on around the Japanese style swords, and it's nice to see a European sword with the same attention to detail in terms of the flats of the blades. It's a pain in the ass to do, requires a steady hand, but it's here. One of the reasons that I think the pronounced price may be justified. Beyond that, the shape of the blade seems symptomatic of a type 18C as I understand it. Lengthwise, there was some variation in the length of these blades. Dynamically though, this sword is quite interesting. It's very heavy. It's 3 pounds, 14 ounces. It's very close to a 4-pound sword, and it doesn't feel it. It feels very lively and nimble. It's comfortable. I wouldn't say it's comfortable to move in one hand. You start to feel the weight there, but I can move it around in one hand and still control the point. Obviously it comes alive in 2 hands, and it becomes quite a nimble sword despite its very pronounced weight. And by that I mean I feel like I have a lot of tip control, but it also feels like I can put the edge exactly where I want it to be. Now you won't see me do that because I'm actually not capable of it, but I do feel very connected to it nonetheless. In terms of its ergonomics and how the blade is designed and moves, it's really quite comfortable, and I'll be able to compare and contrast it to other blades that are the type 18C format. I have the Ronin War Sword, which is a similar profile. It's like a $500 sword. There's the Albion Alexandria, which may not be as representative as say the Principe would be, but I have the dynamics on that as well, so you can compare and contrast this to other swords of its type. Anyway, dynamically speaking, it feels about right, but it also is a little bit different in terms of how it compares to the others. The thing is that this sword is supposed to feel lively. The point of balance is supposed to be a little closer to the hand despite its imposing size, and so I think Lukas got the dynamics of this sword well, where they're supposed to be. The only thing that seemed odd is that the hilt node was a little lower than it has been in some other examples, but I didn't feel vibration in my hand or really any discomfort, and I really like the execution of the grip. Overall, this sword is it's wonderful. I suppose that brings me to cutting. How well did it cut? Well, it cut better than the other examples that I have. Note that it is quite a bit sharper. It has a very keen, well done edge on it, and that certainly aided in moving through the various targets that I tested. I'm not putting it really through its paces or testing the limits of what this sword is capable of because Sword Trend Corey would like it back in one piece. But in terms of moving through used Japanese tatami mats, which are what I'm testing here, it really sailed through those tatami mats quite well. It was not hard to use. I do want to be careful not to whack it into the floor, but overall it's a joy to move and a joy to use, and really sailed through targets well. Lukas, even though there's a secondary bevel on it, I wouldn't say it impeded cutting performance. It's nice and sharp and really just an excellent sword overall. So that brings me to the part of the review where I answer the question, do I personally think it's worth it or not? So if I compare this package to the, say, Ronin katana that's out there at around $500, the Ronin comes with the scabbard. This would be 3,000, a little over euros, plus another 400 for the Scabbard, bringing you to around 3,500-ish euros. What that translates to in the US dollar depends on a whole bunch of things, but it's a little bit more than $3,500 all said and done. In comparison, this is just a very different thing. It's custom made to Sword Francore's specification, and almost every little detail is seen to very meticulously, and dynamically it feels quite a bit different. So even though they may bear some striking similarities aesthetically, they're really quite different dynamically in the execution of the cut. But nevertheless, you could sharpen up the Ronin and get past the dynamic difficulties that it presents and save yourself a whole lot of money. If you compare it to, say, an Albion, well, this sword is $3,000-ish. The Albions are $1,200, $1,500. I suppose it depends on what they're going for or where you get them. The point is, though, that this is roughly 2 to 3 times the cost of an Albion sword, and what it does better, it has nicer polish, it has a cleaner, flatter lines on it, the central ridges waver less, and overall the manufacturing execution, I would say, is probably more similar than it is different, but Lukas did a better job on executing on the details while preserving the dynamic proportions that this sword is supposed to have. And you have the luxury of getting it custom made for you by a sword maker of some repute. So is that worth it? Well, I guess you have to answer that question for yourself. I personally find value in it. I personally think that when things are individually handmade, that they're a little bit more fun, and seeing them executed at this level by one craftsman is really quite a treat. So yes, I think it's worth it. I certainly don't think it's a rip-off. I recognize both the skill, the time, and talent that it takes to make something like this, but you have to be willing to pay for it, because it's certainly a lot of money. Anyway, I don't find it to be a rip-off. I find it to be quite valuable, and this is this is so far the best Type 18C sword that I've held and moved around, and it has been a joy to hold. So hopefully that answers the question. Yes, I think it's worth it, but it's a hell of a lot of money, so you have to answer that question for yourself. We have to recognize that there are less expensive options out there that are going to effectively do something similar, but if you want the hotness of this custom blade and all its refinement and nice details, then I guess you have to pony up for it. So that's all I have for you about this specific sword. I will do a follow-up video where I compare this to the Albion Alexandria that I have, as well as the Ronin War Sword, which are similar Type 18C swords, and whatever other Type 18C sword or similar sword I can fit in the comparison, so you can compare quality and contrast the price and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's big enough where it's maybe a totally separate video to compare all of those things. Anyway, that's all I have for you about this video, about this particular sword, so I will stop here. As always, cheers, and thank you for watching. Actually, just kidding, there's more stuff. Lukas agreed to have a little bit of a conversation about this review, about this sword, and basically we're going to share that with you, so hopefully you find it interesting. Bear in mind the timeline here. I've recorded this review, given my thoughts, sent that to Lukas, and he's going to have a chance to respond, and I won't edit or change my responses or thoughts in the review, but Lukas will be able to respond to whatever criticisms I had, or if I said something boneheaded or wrong or misrepresented something, he'll have a chance to talk about it. Anyway, this is going to be a conversation with Lukas. Hopefully you find it valuable. The first thing that I would do is say, for channel purposes, could you give yourself an introduction? Who you are, what you do, and maybe what got you into swords and making them.
All right, well, my name is Lukas Mästle-Goer, which probably none of you will be able to pronounce anyway. But, well, I'm from Germany. I got into swords as a little kid, as I would suppose most of us did. And when I was around 15 or such, I started, well, making knives and such in my grandfather's old workshop. And since then, I just stuck to it, and now I'm, well, making swords. I've been making them for selling for, I think, 4 to 5 years now. And it's just a thing on the side. My main job is being a doctor. I finished med school 1.5 years ago, so I'm working full-time as a doctor, and sword making is, well, what I do on the side. Essentially a hobby that finances itself, not to remake any money that way.
And if I could
also,
jump in...
I'm a fencer. I do HEMA. I'm a fencing instructor with the longsword mainly. And I go to tournaments. I've come around in the HEMA scene, at least in Europe. I've never been to the US to a tournament, but I've been to many European tournaments.
And as a medical professional, I read that you are a neurosurgeon. Is that correct?
well, not a surgeon exactly. I did well. I'm training in neurology. That's true, but it's two different things. So a neurosurgeon and the regular neurologist, you would say.
Okay, was that because rocket science was too hard?
Actually, I'm not too much a fan of physics. So in a way, I would agree that rocket science is not for me.
With me and my daughter, I always tell her it's not rocket surgery. That's my default stupid thing.
Okay.
If she's being a pain in the ass, I'll say, God, it's not rocket surgery. Come on. Well, anyway, it's kind of it's an interesting mix of professional day and night there. Being a neurologist, sorry for the not neurosurgeon, neurologist, that still seems equally difficult to me. And then
okay.
and then Swordmaker by night. That's quite the duality.
Yeah. Well, I was sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that an American sword maker or blade maker I met some years ago, Dave Stevens, whom I don't know if you know him or not. He used to say that his workshop is his church, and I kind of agree with that. So I mean, after a day at my day job, if I go to my workshop and spend a few hours working on swords, that's a good way to relax, to leave the working stress behind.
Well, that's fair. The work that I've only seen this one sword of your handiwork, but it looks like you put. I mean, there's a lot of little details on it that seem like a big pain in the ass to get right. I noticed that the planes are very flat, that the gap around the crossguard is very small, and generally speaking, I've heard other smiths describe those tasks as arduous and time-consuming. Is that the case for you, or is your methodology different?
Well, I would say that occasionally it is hard work. Polishing, for example, is not something I enjoy, but I'm in a position that I can just take the time I want to take. I don't rely on it to earn a living, so I can just say, okay, I will continue next time if I'm done for the day. There's no need to meet any time restraints or anything like that. So that's a very helpful position to be in, I would say.
And how do you balance? Do you still take commissions? Do you still take on additional work?
I have. But I stopped now because actually starting next year I will be working in a hospital, and so far I've been working in a private practice with less hours and free weekends, so that of course helps with sword making. And starting January I will be working in the hospital, and I don't yet know how much time I will have left to work on swords or anything else. So for the time being I'm not accepting any commissions, but it might very well change as soon as I know how things are going in the hospital.
I see. I suppose it's kind of a good excuse. If I don't do, if I were in your position making swords, and I didn't get to it, it'd be difficult to excuse myself. And you could say like, I'm sorry, I'm saving lives over here. I'm a doctor by day.
Yeah.
Is it stressful to balance commissions and your day job?
It can be, which is, I'm from the very beginning. I tell, or I used to tell my customers that it'll take a long time. I cannot promise when it will be done, and it must be understood that I might not be able to meet the first criteria of when the sword will be ready. So that helps, of course, but it's still when you work and there's the project at the back of your head that you still need to get to. That's not a nice position to be in. So that's why I decided that while I'm unsure how things are going at the hospital, I will not be taking any new commissions. I have one to finish. It's almost done. It's a longsword with a complex hilt. It's at the Scabbard guy at the moment. So that's the last piece I will be will be working on. As a commission as of now, but as I said, it might very well be back to making swords on a commission basis by next year.
And in terms of being a sword maker, you said you practice HEMA,
and you obviously have you're a doctor by day. Which of those things do you find is more useful in making a sword? Do any of them
sword
influence?
fencing by far, of course. Yeah.
Being a doctor doesn't help you say like, if I make this a little bit more like a scalpel, I could.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'm not a surgeon, so I'm not cutting people up as a day job. So actually, as a neurologist, you don't really use any kind of knives. So
well, that sounds boring.
My sword fencing is what helps me more.
See, I don't know what a neurologist does. You can see my ignorance coming through. I still think of you as a neurosurgeon. To me, you're just operating on brains all day, and I can't shake that mental picture.
I'm looking at pictures of brains most of the time, and I'm looking at patients, but very rarely with a knife in my hand, unless I'm eating.
Hopefully not brains, or maybe
no.
As you practice HEMA, what have you found that has influenced your sword making? Is there a particular thing that you think mass production swords, or maybe other smiths or other swords that you've held, miss that you try to get into your work that's influenced through your practice?
I would say that knowing how a sword has to move in fencing really helps, and that's something that many reproductions don't get right. I mean, some do, of course. I have several Albions, and most of them are excellent in that department as well. But many other production swords just don't properly help you while you're fencing. So a sword should make things easier, not harder, as you do certain techniques. And being able to know what you should do with a sword really helps while making them. That's what I would say.
And does your appreciation for how a sword should move evolve with time and practice? For example, when you started HEMA and sword making, was your idea of a good sword fundamentally different than it is today?
I wouldn't say it was fundamentally different, but it was less refined for sure. I mean, over time I've grown to I've come to know the little details more. So overall, it's a good sword. Well, a sword I thought to be a good sword back in 2007 when I started HEMA. It's still a good sword today, but I'm more capable of finding the little details.
Okay.
And of course, making the little details come true in my own swords. That's of course something else.
That's fair. This sword is a very large sword. Is there a favorite type of sword that you have to make?
I will say this: I've been mostly making Type 18B swords, so the slender longsword types like the Albion Munich. That's what most customers want in a longsword, and that's what I've been making for the most part. Also, since it's my own favorite type, so I've made far more Type 18B swords than any other sword type. But I wouldn't say it's inherently better or anything like that.
Do you prefer making them, or is the diversion of making an 18C
actually,
big wide sword?
By now I've grown kind of tired of making them. I've done too many.
Is there something that you'd really like to make?
Pardon?
Is there something that you'd really like to make in the future? A project that you would that would be really inspiring to do?
Well, today I started on a reverse edged falchion, which is a very rare type of sword. I think there are only 2 originals remaining, and it's always something that has interested me. And my last sword was a cutlass, also something that I've never done before and that really interested me. So I'm moving away from the medieval longsword towards other types of swords. I really want to make a gladius at some point, but so far it just hasn't happened.
And so you mentioned you've made a lot of Type 18B swords, and now you're expanding into other types. Is it difficult to have the same level of refinement the first time you go out of the gate, or does all the swords that you've made allow you to make something very refined the first try?
Well, I hope that all of them are quite refined, but I do think that making the same type over and over again allows you to really nail it down on the 3rd or 4th try. I would say that, yeah.
Okay. So if somebody orders one of your cutlasses, they should try to get the 5th one or above.
Well, the thing is that, of course, every sword is unique in its way. So even if I would say that if I were to say that this sword is actually a little bit better than the other one, the customer might not agree, because it's a very personal thing in a way. It's hard to objectively say this sword is better than that one, because when they're both at a very high level, the differences might be more personal preference than actual facts.
Fair enough. Well, I suppose the next thing I'd like to ask you is, you've seen at least the review that I made, and any criticisms or whining that I had to do. Is there anything that stands out directly as something you'd like to respond to? Something you think I got wrong, or something you think I got right, though that seems less likely?
Not so much, actually. And the only thing I would like to comment on is that you mentioned that the sword has a secondary bevel. I wouldn't agree with that per se. For me, a secondary bevel means a change in geometry. So if you have a primary bevel and then a secondary bevel at the very edge, where the geometry actually changes. And what you see on my swords, and actually all of my swords, is a change in polish, but not so much one in geometry. That comes from the fact that I will, at the very end, when the sword blade is polished at 1000 grit, I will do the final sharpening of the edge on the slack belt sander with a very, very fine belt, and then go on to the leather. And this creates a different level of polish at the very, very edge. And that looks like a secondary bevel, but it's not. I mean, if you move over the geometry, it's one single curve. There's no step in profile. So
okay.
For me, that's not a secondary bevel, but that's open to discussion. Certainly.
I think that may be a lack of observational skills on my part. When I look at it, it seems like a secondary bevel, but I will acknowledge that maybe I haven't looked close enough. So I'll pull up when I edit the video, I'll pull up a microscope video thing, and I'll zoom in very close to overlay what you're talking about with a much clearer image. So thank you for pointing that out. The other thing that I think came up is the packaging. Now, in the review, I noted that the scabbard was poking out of the end. That wasn't shipped from you. That was shipped from somebody else, who hopefully might join this video at some point and offer some commentary. But the sword wasn't shipped from you, so I don't know if your packing methods. Well, somebody shouldn't expect the scabbard to be poking out if they order a sword from you.
Actually, when I heard that, I was horrified, because that should never happen. And so far, I've never had any issue with shipping swords, and I've shipped them all over the world. So that would be the first time. But I would be very interested in knowing what's the case here. So if the person who shipped it to you, if he unpacked it or not, because if he didn't, then I need to, of course, reconsider the way I packed my swords.
Well, that's...
But luckily nothing happened, so that's always good. Nothing is worse for a sword maker than to find out that his precious sword has been damaged in shipping or lost here, God forbid.
Yeah,
so that's something we need to look into.
I would say in the case when it came out, I'd have to look. I thought I took a picture of it with my phone, and I haven't been able to find it. But it was a little scary, because it's also, I'm the middleman. Somebody sent this to me to review and would like it back in ideally good condition. So if I do some sort of cutting and it breaks, that's one thing. But if it breaks before it gets to me, or is from neglect or negligence on my part, then that's a different case. So it seemed as though the post office may have kicked it from England to my house. The package was not exactly in the best condition. It looked like maybe somebody was using it for sparring or something. Anyway, it's tough to say what the post office was doing with it. But I did see the tip of the scabbard poking out, and I instantly thought, okay, this is not good. Fortunately, there wasn't any problem with the sword. Obviously, I've taken pictures of it, and it's in very good shape. But that's a testament to a well-made scabbard. If it was,
I suppose so.
If it was flimsy and would hold up
Yeah.
to some degree of struggle, then the post office would have damaged it. So that's good. Anyway, I will try to send you what information I can on it, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect. Obviously, you didn't get to be a neurologist by being really lazy with details. At least I'd assume not.
No.
Or maybe, I don't know, maybe I hold doctors in a higher esteem, but maybe you're equally messy and lazy
Well,
like the rest of us. I don't know.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Fair enough. Was there any other thing on the review that you thought I missed or that you'd like to respond to? There's not a ton of criticism, so...
No, I think the review was good. And one thing that you mentioned about my maker's mark, that's actually something I noticed as well. You said it has a kind of a halo or a shadow around it. I have no idea what happened there. I etched my maker's marks, and I've never seen that before, and it actually didn't look that bad when I shipped the sword. And I tried to polish it over, but I couldn't polish off the maker's mark either. So of course I just left it at that. So that's something that I also don't know how it got there. But that's really all. Otherwise, I did enjoy the review. I mean, and I did enjoy the cutting. It showed that the sword is an excellent cutter, also on the double tatami mats. So all in all, I think it was a very thorough review with excellent pictures and up to your usual standards, I would say.
Oh, I have standards. Yes.
Yes, you do. I would say that.
Yes, it did cut pretty well. I kind of, when I was making the commentary on the review, I forgot that I did a double roll. So inside that double roll was a very, very old and moldy mat. We had done a demonstration at a brewery, and I took all of the old mat scraps and I saved them, and I thought, I'll make a double roll. So I put that together, and then the outside was used Japanese tatami, and the inside was a very hard and very. I think the mold may have strengthened it somehow, but you can see in one of the cuts, it looks like the inner mat had been cut before, and it had. It basically was a mat that had lots of failed cuts on it. So at one point, I met an existing cut there, but still, it moved through double rules really, really easily. It was the best Type 18C sword that I've cut with. Though, in fairness, the Albion and the Ronin iteration don't have a very refined edge. I think yours came out of the box ready to go, ready to party, and the Albion and the Ronin iteration, the edge would require a little bit more effort on my part to bring up to the same level of polish. And I mean, that's another thing that I often kind of harp on. Some people are good at polishing their swords or sharpening them, I should say. I'm not. It's really easy for me to make the edge diminished in quality rather than improved in quality. So knowing that you could buy a sword from you and it's comes out of the gate sharp, even having been sent to the Scabbard maker or wherever else it had to go, it arrived to me after several different journeys, very, very sharp and ready to go. It was. It also held up. One thing I didn't draw attention to is I whacked the top of a bottle. In one of those.
I saw that.
Yeah, and it's really easy to understate how hard that is for a sword. So the top of a plastic bottle with the cap and the kind of reinforced plastic there, it can be really, really hard. And I've had it damage swords in the past when you do a bad strike to the tip of a bottle. It's kind of like hitting a rock, and there's no edge deformation or any sign that I did that. So all in all, it's held up very well. I was also surprised at how rigid it was. You can see in some of the slow motion video, it doesn't have a lot of flex in the blade. For a blade of its size, that's kind of surprising. Even when they're really robust and heavy, they still waggle around. At least when you get them in the slow mo. So something about how you made it really stiff, and it's not because it's necessarily thicker. So I'm not sure. I don't understand the sword physics of it, but hopefully you do.
Well, essentially, stiffness in that sense is a matter of geometry and length. It has nothing to do with the heat treatment. That's something else that the blade will flex the same before and after heat treatment. It just will spring back to its own shape more readily and well, without taking a set after heat treatment. But the blade is the same stiffness. That's something that many people see differently, or in my eyes, see wrongly. That they will say that a good heat treatment will make a blade stiffer, but that's not the case. The blade is the same stiffness-wise, but it will of course deform, or it will take less. It will take more abuse without taking a set. But essentially, what? Pardon?
Do you heat treat the blades yourself, or do you have a separate company do it? Okay.
I do it now. That sword actually was the last one I had heat treated. I'm now heat treating my own blades. I built an electrical heat treating oven essentially, and I'm doing my own heat treating now. But that one was heat treated by a friend of mine who does an excellent job, and I actually built the same furnace that he also has. So. And I've done 2 swords since then. Well, I heat treat 2 swords, and the result was similarly good. So from now on, I will do all my own blades.
Yes, it's held up. I also there's a few bits of video that don't show up where I give it a smack into that giant rug that I have.
Yeah.
And again, the blade doesn't wiggle a lot. It doesn't deform. It held up very well. It also seems relatively abrasion resistant. And looking at the sword, most of the video that I showed close-ups of the blade of are after the cutting, and there's not a lot of blemishes that showed up. What steel did you use to make the sword?
The steel is 56 SI7, which is similar to 9260, I believe, if you go by the American certifications. And it's heat treated to about 57 degrees Rockwell. So it's hard, very hard for a sword blade. But all my blades, I have that hardness, and I will actually draw down the base and the tang of the blade a little more to make it more to make it tougher.
And why do you choose that steel over any of the other options available to you?
Mainly, for 2 reasons. One, I can get it in the suitable sizes. That's not always the case. And secondly, it gives a very, very tough sword blade, even at a high hardness. That same steel can be used for blunts, for feathers, for fencing gear, whatever. But you can also heat treat it or temper it to a higher hardness, and then it keeps its immense durability even at that high hardness, and that makes it perfect for a sword blade. I would not use it for a kitchen knife. That's just not the ideal steel for that. But for any sword blade or for a very tough camping knife, it's a good choice.
Fair enough. Well, I think that's all the questions I had on the review side. Overall, it's a really fun sword. It's a lot of money. That's I suppose the other bit. But in terms of money-wise, what do you think justifies a $3,000 sword in comparison to something else? Why do you think it's worth it?
It's worth it because it's unique. There's only one in the world like it, and I will not make the same sword again. And it's worth it to the person who can really get the sword he wants. So this is 100% custom built. Corey wanted that exact sword, and that's what he got. And other than going custom, there's no way of getting exactly what you want, unless, of course, you want exactly the sword Albion makes, and that's fine too. I mean, if you want precisely the sword Albion already has to offer, then you should probably get that one and not spend twice or 2 times the amount to get the exact same sword. But if you want something that's different, then custom sword is the only way to go.
Yeah, I think you undersell yourself a little on that sales pitch. Your sword preserves some of the. I mean, I'm not a student of historic European martial arts, so how a sword should feel, I can tell you if it feels good and if I can move it around. And there's similarities to Japanese swordsmanship or Filipino weapon arts and historic European martial arts. You get a feeling for a tool that moves well versus not. But I can't necessarily tell you what a Type 18C should feel like, other than what little bits I read and that. But I can say that you seem to preserve the dynamic properties of a sword. It doesn't. Your sword weighs more than any of the other two options that I've seen in this category, but feels nimble. It doesn't feel clunky or cumbersome. To your point, you can move it around, and you're one of the first smiths in the European realm of things that has exceeded a mass-produced type of quality that Albion puts out. There are, as I mentioned, some minor imperfections but again, there are on Albion, and they're using a CNC machine, and there are more surface ripples. There's less degrees of polish. There are imperfections in the fittings and things like that, and they're small, but they're still there. The point is that very often when you have a custom smith manufacture a sword, it's pretty rare that I see the quality go beyond what a CNC mill and kind of mass-produced pieces with attention to detail put out there. So, I mean, obviously, it takes time and it costs money, but if you're looking for a more refined level of detail, it's nice to know that there are smiths like you out there capable of doing it, and and I suppose proof is in all the photos that I showed. It's very flat and very pretty, and I think that costs money and is well done. I think there are people out there willing to pay for that level of quality, as well as obviously the factors that you mentioned, being unique and being made to order, and yeah, it costs money. People will complain about it, but it certainly costs money.
No way around that. It's just how it is.
Yeah. Plus, like I would expect some sort of medical joke. We always bitch about the cost of medical stuff in the United States. To be like, well, when you have a doctor make your sword, obviously the costs are going to be ludicrous. Anyway, that's. I think that's all the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you'd like to chat about before we wrap things up? All right.
No, actually, nothing I can think of.
Lukas reached out after the interview and asked me to point out one additional thing, something frankly I should have noted earlier on in the actual review, and that is this gap in the crossguard scabbard where they kind of butt up and meet. There's a slight gap, and you can kind of make it out down here, and it's quite tense. I gotta push it quite a bit, and then still there's this gap. Well, if I take the sword out and flip it around, then the gap disappears and it is even Steven. Now, I don't exactly know why it fits in one way better than the other, but suffice to say it does, and so there's a right way and a wrong way to fit it. It's obviously a pretty small detail. If you fit it in one way or the other, it still fits, but this way you can see it's seamless along where the sword and scabbard meet up.
Well, then I'll just say thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I hope the audience finds it interesting. It's always good to hear from the maker, and so again, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for the review. And I hope that Corey will really like the sword.
I want to give a special thanks to Lukas for taking the time out of his day to listen to my ramblings, respond to them, and have a good conversation with me about said sword and other swords. I also want to thank sword friend Corey for taking the time to send the sword my way and paying the bill and being very, very patient while I got to dig around with it and make this video. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's worthwhile. As always, cheers, and thank you for watching. It's clipped here. I think nurples are somewhere down here. This would be a really high nipple. You can go ahead and focus on me. Hello there, sword friends. Mastle-Goer. Hello there, too far. Well, let me fucking start over. Hello there, sword friends. Hello there, sword friends. Anyway, on with the ramblings. It's a hot take. Where are they? You can see my eyes. Oh my. Yeah. A similar hilt or similar fucking. It'd be helpful if I could actually speak. Inspiration. I forget how to say words when I do these reviews. Oh, fuck me running. Fill your head with knowledge before you ramble about it. Fucking finish your thought. But yeah, I think it's worth it. I think if you want, what's the best way to put it? Shit, I don't know. Conclusion comes last. Fuck that.
Good.
Okay, I don't have anything in my beard.
No, you don't.
Oh,
The picture I see of myself looks rather dark. I'm not sure. Can you see me, or is it?
you are an
Open-
ominously shaded figure. You look like Batman, maybe. You just...
Well, thank you.
If you held your phone like this...
That works. I can try that.
I know it's a little weird. Let me see. Facebook is not... Nope, that did not... Never mind. Okay, well, fuck it. We'll call it there.